Most people believe poverty is caused by a lack of money. That belief feels logical. It feels rational. It feels almost scientific. If someone has little money, the explanation appears obvious. They simply need more income. But this belief hides something far more dangerous. Because income is not the system that determines financial outcomes. Income is only the visible surface. Beneath it lies an invisible architecture, a structure of behaviors, incentives, time horizons, and psychological patterns that quietly determines who builds wealth and who remains trapped chasing it. This is the part no one teaches, not in school, not in most financial advice, not even in many success stories. And because of that absence, millions of intelligent, hardworking people unknowingly repeat the same financial pattern for decades. They work harder. They earn more. They upgrade their lifestyle. They feel temporary progress. Then something strange happens. The bank account refuses to change. Years pass. Income rises, but wealth remains distant. This creates a silent psychological tension that very few people talk about. A quiet financial anxiety, the feeling that something is wrong, but the exact cause remains invisible. So people blame themselves. They assume they lack discipline. They assume they are not ambitious enough. They assume wealth belongs to some rare category of people who possess a mysterious advantage. But this is where the structure begins to reveal itself. Because the real reason most people remain poor is not low income, and it is not bad luck, or it is a single strategic mistake embedded deep inside the way most people interact with money. A mistake so normalized that it appears completely rational. In physics, there is a concept called escape velocity. A rocket must reach a specific speed to break free from Earth's gravitational pull. Anything slower, and gravity pulls it back down. Financial systems operate in a remarkably similar way. Money also has gravity. Certain behaviors create upward financial momentum. Other behaviors trap people in a permanent orbit around survival. The tragedy is this: most people spend their entire lives accelerating in the wrong direction. They increase effort without changing trajectory. They optimize inside a system that quietly guarantees stagnation. This is why people who earn six figures can still feel financially fragile. It is why people who appear successful still live paycheck to paycheck. It is why decades of hard work can produce surprisingly little long-term security. Because the mistake that keeps most people poor does not look like a mistake. It looks responsible. It looks normal. It even looks successful. This is the trap. And once you see the structure behind it, an uncomfortable realization begins to surface. The financial game most people are playing was never designed to produce wealth. It was designed to produce stability, predictability, and long-term dependency on income. But there is another way to operate, a completely different financial architecture, one that changes how money behaves around you, one that changes how time multiplies your efforts, one that quietly turns financial gravity into financial momentum. Yet before that system can be understood, something critical must happen first. The illusion surrounding the original mistake must be dismantled. Because until you see it clearly, you will continue optimizing the very pattern that keeps most people poor. And what makes this mistake so powerful is where it actually begins. Not in your bank account, not in your investments, but in a hidden structure inside everyday financial decisions. A structure that silently programs the trajectory of your entire financial life. And once that structure becomes visible, everything changes. But first, we need to examine the invisible architecture behind the system itself. Because this is where the real story begins. There is a moment in every financial life when a quiet realization begins to form. Two people can work equally hard. They can earn similar salaries. They can even start from similar backgrounds. Yet, 20 years later, their financial realities look completely different. One has assets quietly producing income. The other is still exchanging time for money. This divergence confuses many people because the visible variables appear identical. Same effort, same discipline, same working hours. But the outcome is radically different. This is where the invisible architecture of money begins to reveal itself. Because financial outcomes are rarely determined by effort alone. They are determined by structure. And structure operates quietly beneath everyday decisions. Most people believe money flows in a simple line: work to earn, to spend, to repeat. At first glance, this cycle appears responsible. Stable job, stable income, stable life. Society rewards this structure with social approval. Parents encourage it. Schools prepare students for it. Companies depend on it. But here is the critical detail most people never examine. This system was designed for income stability, not wealth creation. Those are two very different financial environments. Income stability keeps the system predictable. It ensures people continue working, continue consuming, continue participating in the economic engine. But wealth creation requires something entirely different. It requires ownership of financial systems, not participation inside them. This distinction changes everything, because the mistake that keeps most people poor begins right here. Most people optimize their lives around income, not assets. They become extremely efficient at increasing their salary. They negotiate raises. They change jobs for higher pay. They pursue advanced education. And while all of these actions appear financially intelligent, they share a hidden limitation. Income always requires continuous human effort. Assets do not. This difference seems small at first, but over time it becomes enormous. Imagine two financial engines. The first engine runs on labor. When the person stops working, the engine stops producing money. The second engine runs on ownership. Once built, the system continues producing value whether the owner is actively working or not. This is the invisible financial architecture most people never see. They build their entire lives around the first engine. They increase its speed. They improve its efficiency. They even sacrifice their health and time to maximize its output. But no matter how efficient the labor engine becomes, it still has a fundamental constraint. It cannot operate without the individual's continuous presence. This is where the trap quietly forms. Because as income rises, lifestyle expectations begin to rise alongside it. A larger apartment, a more expensive car, more sophisticated consumption. Each upgrade feels justified by the increase in earnings. Each upgrade feels like progress. But behind the scenes, something subtle happens. The financial structure becomes more fragile, not stronger. Higher income creates higher obligations. Higher obligations create dependence on continuous earnings. And dependence creates vulnerability. Now, the system must keep running. Not because of ambition, but because of necessity. This is why many high earners quietly feel financial pressure despite impressive salaries. Their income increased, but their structural position did not change. They are still inside the same architecture, the labor engine. This is the moment where many people experience a silent internal conflict. They worked hard to improve their financial life. They followed the responsible path. Yet the sense of true financial security remains elusive. This is not a personal failure. It is a structural misunderstanding. And once this becomes visible, something powerful happens. the shame disappears. Because the problem was never intelligence. It was never discipline. It was never ambition. The problem was optimizing inside a financial structure that does not produce wealth. It produces stability, predictability, and long-term dependence on income. This is why the mistake that keeps most people poor is so dangerous. It does not look like a mistake. It looks responsible. It looks safe. It looks exactly like the path society encourages. But the moment you begin seeing the difference between earning money and building financial engines, the architecture shifts. You start asking different questions. Not, how can I make more money this year? But, how can I build systems that produce money without constant effort? This question introduces a completely new financial dimension. Ownership, assets, leverage, time multiplication. But before those systems can be understood, another hidden layer must be examined. Because even when people understand the importance of assets, many still sabotage their own financial trajectory. Not intentionally, but psychologically. Because human behavior around money is not purely rational. It is emotional. It is social. It is identity-driven. And in the next section, the deeper behavioral traps begin to surface. Traps powerful enough to neutralize intelligence, discipline, and even high income. This is where the real psychological game of money begins. And it explains why escaping poverty is not just about knowledge. It is about rewiring how decisions are made under pressure. Once the invisible financial architecture becomes clear, a surprising question begins to emerge. If the path to wealth requires building assets instead of depending solely on income, why do so many intelligent people continue making decisions that move them in the opposite direction? This is where the story becomes more complex. Because money decisions are rarely logical. They are emotional. They are social. And most importantly, they are tied directly to identity. Human beings do not spend money simply to solve practical problems. They spend money to communicate signals. Signals about status. Signals about belonging. Signals about success. This signaling system is one of the most powerful behavioral forces in the entire economy, and it quietly shapes financial outcomes in ways most people never recognize. Consider a simple pattern. A person receives a salary increase. Immediately, subtle lifestyle changes begin to appear. A slightly better phone, more expensive clothing, frequent restaurant visits, a nicer apartment. Individually, each decision appears harmless, but collectively, they form something economists call lifestyle inflation. Our income rises. Spending rises alongside it. The gap that could have become investment capital quietly disappears. This pattern repeats again and again across income levels. A person earning $30,000 spends like someone earning $30,000. A person earning $70,000 begins living like someone earning $70,000. A person earning $150,000 often spends like someone earning $150,000. The result is astonishing. Across different income brackets, the same structural reality appears again and again. Little long-term wealth accumulation. This is not accidental. It is driven by a deep psychological mechanism known as relative comparison. Humans rarely measure their success in absolute terms. They measure it relative to the people around them. If everyone in your environment upgrades their lifestyle, the pressure to do the same becomes nearly invisible. No one explicitly demands it, but the social signal is clear. Progress must be visible. This is why financial decisions often prioritize appearance over leverage. A luxury car is visible. An investment portfolio is not. Designer clothing is visible. Equity ownership is not. A larger home is visible. cash-flowing assets are not. Because of this visibility bias, consumption receives social rewards that wealth building rarely does: compliments, recognition, validation. These emotional rewards reinforce the spending cycle, and slowly, the financial trap tightens. But the psychological pattern goes even deeper, because money decisions are often tied to identity narratives formed early in life. If someone grows up in an environment where financial struggle is normal, they may unconsciously associate money with temporary relief rather than long-term strategy. When money finally arrives, the instinct becomes, enjoy it now. Because historically, money has always been temporary. This creates a powerful behavioral loop. Earn money. Release financial tension through spending. Return to earning. Repeat. The loop feels emotionally satisfying in the short term, but financially, it prevents the creation of capital momentum. Another hidden factor amplifies this effect: emotional spending triggers. Stress, fatigue, social pressure. These states reduce long-term thinking. When the brain is under pressure, it prioritizes immediate relief. Buying something new creates a brief emotional reward, a small dopamine release, a sense of regained control. Retail industries understand this psychology extremely well. Entire marketing strategies are designed around it: flash sales, limited time offers, luxury branding, social media lifestyle imagery. Each tactic activates a subtle emotional pressure. Consume now, think later. And while these decisions feel small in isolation, they compound over time into something far more powerful. Financial drift. Drift is dangerous because it feels passive. There is no dramatic financial collapse. There is no catastrophic mistake. There is only a slow erosion of potential. 10 years pass, 20 years pass. Income arrives and disappears with mechanical consistency, and the asset engine never begins. But the most dangerous psychological trap may be this one: status illusion. As a person driving a luxury vehicle may appear financially successful. A person wearing expensive clothing may appear wealthy. But many of these signals are financed by debt and income dependency. The external appearance of wealth hides an internal fragility. Meanwhile, true wealth often looks surprisingly ordinary. Investors quietly accumulating assets rarely display visible signals. Their capital is working silently inside systems that produce future cash flow. This difference creates one of the strangest illusions in modern economies. People often try to imitate the appearance of wealth rather than the structure of wealth. This is why financial advice that focuses only on budgeting or saving often fails. Because the deeper challenge is not arithmetic. It is psychology. Escaping poverty requires breaking a powerful behavioral feedback loop that rewards consumption while ignoring ownership. But once this psychological structure becomes visible, another question naturally emerges. If behavior determines financial direction, what exactly happens when time and mathematics begin amplifying those behaviors? Because money has a property that changes everything. A property that quietly determines whether small decisions become massive financial outcomes. And understanding that property reveals why early financial patterns become almost impossible to reverse later in life. This is where the mathematics of wealth begins to enter the story. At a certain point in the journey of understanding money, psychology is no longer enough. Behavior explains why people make certain financial choices. But mathematics explains why those choices eventually produce such dramatic outcomes. And this is where the true power of wealth creation begins to reveal itself. Because money behaves according to a mathematical principle that is both simple and terrifyingly powerful. Compounding. Compounding is not merely a financial concept. It is a force of acceleration. A multiplier of time. A quiet mechanism that turns small advantages into enormous outcomes. When Albert Einstein allegedly referred to compound interest as the eighth wonder of the world, the statement was not philosophical. It was mathematical. Because compounding transforms linear effort into exponential results. And once you understand how this works, a disturbing realization appears. The mistake that keeps most people poor is not just psychological, it is mathematically devastating. To see why, we need to examine the structure behind compounding itself. A equals P times 1 plus R to the power of T. This simple formula quietly governs nearly every wealth-building system in existence. Inside this equation, 4 variables determine financial outcomes. P, the principal, the starting capital. R, the rate of return, how efficiently money multiplies. T, time, the most underestimated financial variable. A, the final accumulated value. At first glance, the formula appears straightforward, but hidden inside it is a powerful asymmetry. Time magnifies everything. A small difference in behavior early in life produces enormous differences decades later. Imagine 2 individuals. Both earn similar incomes. Both have similar intelligence and work ethic. But their financial behaviors diverge slightly. Person A begins investing early, even with small amounts. Person B delays asset accumulation while focusing on lifestyle upgrades. For the first few years, the difference appears negligible, maybe even invisible. Person B may even appear more successful. Better apartment, better car, better social image. But beneath the surface, the mathematics of compounding begins working silently. Year after year, decade after decade. And slowly, the gap begins to widen. Because compounding does not grow in a straight line. It grows in a curve. At the beginning, progress appears slow, almost disappointing. The numbers move gradually. The reward feels small. This is the phase where most people lose patience. They abandon the strategy. They assume it is ineffective. But the curve has not yet reached its acceleration point. And that acceleration point changes everything. Because once enough capital accumulates, the growth rate begins multiplying the existing base. Now the system is no longer driven primarily by new effort. It is driven by accumulated momentum. This is what investors refer to as capital velocity. Money begins generating more money than labor alone ever could. But the reverse is also true. If compounding is delayed long enough, catching up becomes almost impossible. Consider 2 investors again. One begins investing at age 25. The other waits until 40. Even if the second investor contributes more money each year, the time advantage of the first investor is extremely difficult to overcome. Time acts like a multiplier that cannot be purchased later. Once it passes, it disappears permanently. This is why the mistake that keeps most people poor is so dangerous. It delays entry into the compounding system. Years are spent maximizing income while ignoring capital formation. By the time asset accumulation begins, the most powerful compounding years may already be gone. But compounding alone does not explain the entire picture. There is another variable hidden within the formula that dramatically accelerates wealth creation: rate of return. Not all financial systems produce the same multiplication effect. Some systems grow capital slowly. Others create asymmetrical upside. This is why wealthy individuals often focus on acquiring high-leverage assets, businesses, equity ownership, intellectual property, scalable platforms. These assets possess something labor income does not: the ability to scale beyond the limits of time. When these assets succeed, they increase the R variable in the compounding equation. And when both time and return begin multiplying simultaneously, financial velocity increases dramatically. But this introduces a new challenge. Because identifying and acquiring these assets requires a different type of thinking, a different type of patience, and often a different social environment. Which raises another uncomfortable question. If the mathematics of wealth are so powerful, why do even highly educated people fail to apply them consistently? Why do doctors, engineers, executives, and professionals still fall into financial traps despite having access to information? This is where another hidden force begins to emerge. A force stronger than mathematics, stronger than logic, stronger even than intelligence: social programming. And understanding that force explains why escaping the poverty cycle requires more than financial knowledge. It requires resisting the invisible pressures built into modern life. At this stage, the pattern becomes unsettling. We have already seen three powerful forces shaping financial outcomes: the invisible architecture of income versus assets, the psychological traps surrounding spending and identity, the mathematical force of compounding. Individually, each of these forces is significant, but when they interact with another hidden system, the results become almost inevitable. That hidden system is social programming, and it quietly influences financial behavior far more than most people realize. From childhood, the individuals are trained to follow a specific economic script: study hard, obtain credentials, secure stable employment, earn a reliable salary, gradually upgrade lifestyle as income increases. On the surface, this script appears rational. It promises stability. It promises safety. And in many ways, it delivers both. But there is an important detail hidden inside this structure. The system is optimized to produce efficient workers, not independent wealth creators. This distinction rarely becomes visible until much later in life. Because during the early years, the rewards of the system feel tangible: a degree, a job, a promotion, a salary increase. Each milestone reinforces the belief that progress is happening. But progress within a system is not the same as progress beyond the system. And this is where the tension quietly begins to grow. Because the same structure that creates professional advancement can simultaneously prevent financial independence. Work becomes the center of life. Time becomes the currency being exchanged. And as responsibilities increase, something else begins to grow alongside income. Obligations, mortgage payments, car financing, lifestyle commitments, family expenses. Each obligation appears reasonable on its own, but together they create something economists call structural dependency, a condition where an individual must continue producing income simply to maintain their current position. Now the financial system cannot pause, even briefly. And this is where the hidden pressure begins affecting decision-making. Because when survival or stability depends on continuous income, risk tolerance shrinks dramatically. Opportunities requiring patience or uncertainty are often rejected. Investments that require long time horizons feel uncomfortable. Entrepreneurial ventures appear too dangerous. Instead, the individual focuses on protecting the existing income structure. The very system that limits wealth creation becomes the system that must be preserved. This is the trap. And it becomes even more powerful when environmental pressure is added to the equation. Look carefully at modern social environments. Most people are surrounded by others who are following the same financial script. Colleagues upgrade homes when salaries increase. Friends purchase new vehicles. Social media displays constant evidence of consumption-driven success. This creates a powerful feedback loop. If everyone in the environment signals success through lifestyle upgrades, resisting that pattern becomes psychologically difficult. Even highly analytical individuals are vulnerable to this effect, because humans evolved to conform to group behavior. Thousands of years of evolutionary psychology encourage alignment with the tribe. Standing apart from the group historically carried survival risks, so modern individuals often unconsciously replicate the behavior of their environment, even when that behavior contradicts long-term financial logic. But there is another layer to this challenge, one that few financial discussions address directly: decision fatigue. Modern life requires an extraordinary number of daily decisions: work responsibilities, family obligations, digital distractions, constant information flow. Each decision consumes mental energy. By the end of the day, the brain becomes exhausted, and when mental energy declines, decision quality declines with it. In this state, individuals default to convenience, immediate gratification, simple solutions. Long-term strategic thinking requires mental clarity, but mental clarity becomes rare in environments saturated with constant demands. This is why intelligent professionals often make surprisingly poor financial decisions late in the day, not because they lack knowledge, but because their cognitive resources are depleted. The brain simply seeks relief, and relief often arrives in the form of consumption: ordering food, buying something new, escaping into entertainment. Each decision appears harmless, but together, they gradually erode the financial margin required to build assets. Now, combine all those forces: social expectations, lifestyle inflation, structural dependency, decision fatigue. Suddenly, the financial trap becomes clearer. It is not built from one catastrophic mistake. It is constructed from thousands of small decisions that feel completely normal. This is why the system is so powerful. Because it hides inside everyday life, most people never pause long enough to examine the architecture surrounding them. They are simply moving forward within the structure that was handed to them. But occasionally, someone notices something unusual. They observe individuals who seem to operate by entirely different financial rules. These people do not prioritize visible lifestyle upgrades. They speak about assets instead of salaries. They think in decades rather than pay cycles. Their financial strategies appear strangely patient, sometimes even conservative. But over time, the results become undeniable. Their wealth grows quietly, while others remain financially stationary. Which raises the next crucial question: if escaping the poverty trap requires a different financial architecture, what exactly does that architecture look like? What systems do wealthy individuals quietly build that most people never even consider? This is where the conversation shifts from analysis to strategy. Because once the mistake becomes visible, a blueprint must replace it. And that blueprint begins with a completely different way of structuring capital. Once the mistake becomes visible, the next question becomes unavoidable: if optimizing income alone does not create wealth, what system actually does? Because wealth is not an accident. It is the result of a deliberately constructed financial architecture. An architecture built from 5 interconnected layers. Each layer reinforces the others. And when they begin operating together, something remarkable happens. Money stops behaving like a scarce resource. It begins behaving like a self-reinforcing system. But before that system can emerge, the foundation must be constructed correctly. This is the strategic wealth blueprint. And it begins with a concept most people overlook: capital formation. Most individuals treat savings as leftover money. Whatever remains after spending becomes savings. But this approach reverses the true financial order. In wealth-building systems, capital formation happens first. Before lifestyle decisions, before discretionary spending, before consumption. A fixed percentage of income is automatically redirected into capital reserves. This reserve is not an emergency fund. It is not idle savings. It is future investment fuel. Think of it as financial energy stored for deployment. Because without capital reserves, opportunities cannot be captured, and opportunities are the engines that accelerate wealth. This leads to the second layer of the blueprint: asset acquisition logic. Assets are not purchased randomly. They are selected based on a specific strategic framework. A true asset must possess at least one of three properties. First, cash flow generation. The asset produces consistent income streams. Rental properties. Dividend-producing equities, a royalty-based intellectual property. Second, equity appreciation. The asset increases in value over time. Ownership stakes in growing businesses, scarce assets in expanding markets. Third, scalability. The asset can grow beyond the limitations of personal labor. Digital platforms, software systems, content libraries, licensing models. Assets possessing one of these qualities are valuable. Assets possessing all three become extraordinary wealth multipliers. But this introduces the third layer of the blueprint: risk mitigation structure. Many people misunderstand wealth creation as reckless risk-taking. In reality, sophisticated investors focus intensely on risk containment. They avoid single points of failure. Capital is diversified across different asset categories, or income streams are distributed across multiple sources, and investments are structured so that one failure cannot collapse the entire system. This structure transforms uncertainty into manageable probability. Loss becomes survivable, and survival allows the compounding process to continue uninterrupted, which leads to the fourth layer: skill stacking. Assets rarely appear out of thin air. They are often built through specialized knowledge. The most successful wealth builders combine multiple complementary skills: financial literacy, market analysis, negotiation, systems thinking, technology leverage. Each skill alone may have limited power, but when combined, they create unique capabilities. Capabilities that allow individuals to identify opportunities others cannot see. For example, someone who understands both technology and finance can recognize scalable digital business models earlier than most investors. Someone skilled in negotiation and real estate can structure property deals with favorable leverage. Skill stacking increases opportunity detection, and opportunity detection is the gateway to asymmetrical financial outcomes. But the final layer of the blueprint may be the most powerful: cash flow architecture. Most people live within a single financial pipeline: salary to expenses to repeat. But wealth builders design multi-channel financial ecosystems. Income arrives from several directions simultaneously: salary or active income, investment dividends, rental income, business profits, licensing revenue, digital product sales. Each stream may begin small, but together they create something critical: financial redundancy. If one stream weakens, others continue operating. Over time, the asset-generated streams gradually become stronger than the original labor income. At that moment, a structural shift occurs. Income is no longer dependent on time. The financial engine begins operating independently. This is the moment many people describe as financial freedom. But the blueprint contains one final strategic insight: long-term asymmetry thinking. Wealth builders do not focus only on predictable outcomes. They seek opportunities where potential upside dramatically exceeds potential downside. Small investments with enormous possible return. Ideas that can scale globally. systems that require minimal additional effort once built. These asymmetrical opportunities are rare, but when they succeed, they transform financial trajectories permanently. A single successful venture, a single valuable intellectual property, a single well-positioned investment. These moments create exponential shifts, but recognizing them requires patience, discipline, and the willingness to think beyond immediate reward. Which brings us to the next phase of the system, because once the financial blueprint is constructed, something interesting begins to happen. Income and assets start interacting with each other, reinforcing each other, accelerating each other. And this interaction creates a powerful mechanism known as financial acceleration, the moment when wealth stops growing slowly and begins growing rapidly. There is a moment in the wealth-building journey where the entire dynamic changes. Up until this point, progress often feels slow. Income is being saved, assets are being accumulated, capital is being deployed carefully, but results may still appear modest. This stage tests patience. Many people abandon the strategy here because the rewards feel delayed, but those who continue eventually reach a threshold where financial systems begin interacting with each other. And when that interaction begins, something powerful happens. Acceleration. This is the phase where wealth no longer grows linearly. It begins expanding exponentially. But acceleration does not occur randomly. It emerges from a deliberate structure known as the dual engine system. The first engine is active income. This includes salaries, professional services, consulting, or business earnings that require direct effort. The second engine is asset income, dividends, rental cash flow, equity growth, business ownership distributions, digital revenue streams. At the beginning of the wealth journey, the active income engine dominates. It supplies the fuel required to purchase assets. But over time, something subtle begins to change. Assets begin producing their own capital. Dividends get reinvested. Rental income funds new investments. Business profits expand into new ventures. Slowly, the asset engine becomes stronger. When both engines begin operating simultaneously, capital formation accelerates dramatically. Income feeds assets. Assets generate more income. Income purchases additional assets. This feedback loop creates financial momentum, and momentum compounds faster than effort alone ever could. This is the stage where the financial system begins working with you instead of requiring constant effort. But acceleration introduces a new challenge: leverage. Leverage is one of the most misunderstood forces in finance. Used responsibly, it multiplies opportunity. Used recklessly, it destroys wealth. Understanding the difference between controlled leverage and abusive leverage is critical during the acceleration phase. Controlled leverage occurs when borrowed capital is used to acquire productive assets. For example, a rental property financed through a mortgage that tenants repay through rent. A business expansion funded through credit that increases revenue capacity. An investment loan used to acquire assets with predictable income streams. In these cases, leverage amplifies productivity. The borrowed capital works alongside the investor's own capital, but leverage becomes dangerous when it finances consumption. Luxury purchases, depreciating assets, lifestyle upgrades that generate no return. In these cases, borrowed capital creates financial drag. Interest accumulates while the asset loses value. The wealth engine slows instead of accelerating. This distinction explains why some individuals use leverage to build enormous fortunes, while others become trapped in cycles of debt. But there is another strategic dimension within the acceleration phase: optionality. Optionality refers to creating multiple potential paths for future financial growth. Rather than committing entirely to a single outcome, wealth builders position themselves so that several opportunities can succeed simultaneously. For example, an investor may hold equity in multiple startups, knowing that most will fail, but one may succeed dramatically. A content creator may build a library of intellectual property across several platforms, allowing unexpected viral growth. A real estate investor may hold properties in multiple markets, benefiting from regional economic shifts. Optionality increases the probability that at least one opportunity produces asymmetrical returns. And asymmetrical returns are the catalysts that dramatically shift wealth trajectories. However, acceleration also depends on something many people overlook: strategic timing windows. Every economic system moves through cycles. Markets expand. Markets contract. Technological shifts create new industries. Regulatory changes open unexpected opportunities. Individuals who pay attention to these cycles position themselves ahead of major transitions. For example, early internet entrepreneurs benefited from a technological timing window. Investors who recognized emerging renewable energy markets positioned themselves before large capital inflows arrived. Timing windows rarely last forever, but when identified early, they provide powerful leverage points. The combination of dual income engines, controlled leverage, optionality, and timing awareness creates extraordinary financial acceleration. But there is a final dimension to this phase that is rarely discussed. Because as wealth begins to grow, something deeper must change. Not just financial strategy. Identity. The individual must transition from someone who earns money to someone who controls financial systems. And this transition requires a psychological evolution that many people find more difficult than the financial strategy itself. Because wealth is not just built through external actions, it is built through internal transformation. At some point in the wealth journey, financial strategy alone is no longer the main obstacle. The numbers begin to make sense. The systems become visible. The blueprint becomes clear. Yet many people still fail to cross the threshold into true financial independence. Not because the strategy is flawed, but because the identity operating the strategy has not changed. This is one of the most overlooked dynamics in wealth creation. Money systems do not operate in isolation. They operate through human behavior. And human behavior is controlled by identity. Identity determines what feels normal, what feels risky, what feels possible, what feels uncomfortable. If someone still internally identifies as a person whose life revolves around earning a paycheck, their decisions will unconsciously protect that identity. Even when opportunities arise that require a different mindset. This is why identity evolution becomes a critical stage of wealth development. The individual must begin thinking like a system architect, not merely a worker within a system. And this shift begins with one of the most difficult psychological transformations in modern life. Delayed gratification rewiring. Human brains evolved to prioritize immediate rewards. For most of human history, survival depended on reacting to immediate needs: food, shelter, safety. Long-term planning was limited because life expectancy itself was uncertain. But wealth-building systems require something unnatural for the human brain: the willingness to sacrifice immediate comfort for distant advantage. Instead of asking, "What feels good today?" the question becomes, "What strengthens my position 10 years from now?" This question changes financial behavior dramatically. Consumption decisions slow down. Investment decisions become more deliberate. Patience replaces urgency. And slowly, a different relationship with time begins to emerge. Most people measure life in short intervals: weeks, pay cycles, monthly bills. But wealth builders begin measuring time differently. They think in decades. A business decision is evaluated not by next month's outcome, but by its 10-year trajectory. An investment is judged not by short-term volatility, but by long-term structural value. So this time, horizon shift creates a psychological advantage that compounds just like capital, because most market participants are focused on short-term results. Those who operate with long-term patience gain access to opportunities others abandon too early. But identity evolution also requires another difficult skill: strategic detachment. Money decisions often trigger emotional responses: fear during market downturns, excitement during economic booms, anxiety when opportunities require risk. These emotional reactions can easily disrupt long-term strategies. Strategic detachment means separating identity from temporary financial outcomes. A failed investment does not become a personal failure. A temporary loss does not destroy confidence. Instead, each outcome becomes data, information used to refine future decisions. This mindset allows wealth builders to remain stable during periods when others panic. And stability during volatility is often where the greatest opportunities appear. But identity evolution goes even deeper. Because wealth changes the individual's relationship with social expectations. Earlier in life, approval from peers may feel important. Career recognition, lifestyle validation, social status. But as financial independence becomes the objective, those signals lose their importance. The focus shifts inward, toward autonomy, control over time, control over environment, control over decisions. This shift often creates tension, because people who change their financial behavior may appear unusual to those around them. They may spend less despite earning more. They may reject lifestyle upgrades others expect. They may pursue opportunities that appear unconventional. But this is the quiet reality of identity transformation. The individual is no longer optimizing for social alignment. They are optimizing for long-term freedom. And once this identity shift stabilizes, something remarkable happens. Financial strategy becomes easier, because decisions are no longer driven by emotional impulses. They are driven by structural thinking. The individual begins operating like an architect of systems rather than a participant reacting to circumstances. At that moment, the final conceptual transformation begins. Because wealth itself must be redefined, not as income, not as luxury, but as something far more powerful. Control over the structure of one's life. And understanding that definition changes the entire meaning of success. Right at the beginning of the financial journey, wealth usually appears to mean one thing: income, a larger paycheck, a higher salary, a bigger number arriving each month. For most people, this definition remains unchanged for decades. And this is where the final misunderstanding hides. Because income alone does not represent wealth. Income represents financial activity. Wealth represents financial control. The distinction seems subtle, but it changes everything. Consider two individuals. The first earns a large salary, but spends nearly all of it maintaining a demanding lifestyle. Their time is tightly linked to their income. If the income stops, the structure collapses. The second earns less initially, but steadily acquires income-producing assets. Over time, those assets generate cash flow independent of their labor. As if their job disappears tomorrow, the financial structure continues operating. Which individual is actually wealthy? The answer exposes a deeper truth. Wealth is not measured by how much money flows through your life. It is measured by how long your life can operate without active income. This concept transforms how financial success is evaluated. because suddenly, expensive lifestyles lose their symbolic power. Luxury vehicles, high-end apartments, status purchases. These signals may create the appearance of success, but they often disguise fragile financial structures. Real wealth operates quietly. It appears in the form of optional time, freedom from forced decisions, freedom from urgent financial pressure, freedom from environments that restrict personal growth. This leads to the first redefinition. Wealth is time sovereignty, the ability to choose how your time is used, not because you have stopped working, but because work becomes a voluntary decision rather than a survival requirement. Time sovereignty is one of the rarest forms of freedom in modern society, because most economic systems are designed around time exchange, time traded for income. But when asset systems begin producing income independently, the structure shifts. Time detaches from survival. And once time detaches, another transformation becomes possible. Creative autonomy. The individual can pursue projects that are not immediately profitable. Ideas can be developed without financial desperation. Learning can occur without urgent deadlines. This is where some of the most meaningful contributions in business, science, and art begin. But wealth must be redefined even further. Because society often confuses consumption with power. Large houses, visible luxury, high-status possessions. Yet consumption does not generate influence, control does. True financial power comes from the ability to allocate capital, to fund opportunities, to support innovation, to invest in systems that shape the future. This is the difference between someone who spends money and someone who directs money. Directing capital changes industries. It shapes technology. It influences markets. And those who control capital flows often shape the economic landscape itself. But the final redefinition of wealth may be the most important. Because the ultimate goal of financial systems is not accumulation, it is optionality, the ability to choose among many possible futures, to move cities without financial fear, to start a new venture without risking survival, to step away from environments that no longer align with personal values. Optionality is the silent advantage wealth provides. And ironically, once individuals reach this stage, something unexpected happens. Consumption often becomes less important, because freedom itself becomes the most valuable asset. The freedom to think clearly, to move deliberately, to operate without pressure. But there is still one final piece left unresolved, because understanding the system does not automatically change behavior. Knowledge alone rarely transforms lives. Action does, which is why the final step is not theoretical. It is personal. It is a challenge, and it determines whether the invisible mistake continues or finally ends. By now, the structure should be visible. The mistake that keeps most people poor was never about intelligence. It was never about working hard. And it was rarely about opportunity. The mistake was structural. Most people unknowingly build their lives around income dependence, a system where survival requires continuous effort, where time must constantly be exchanged for money, where financial pressure never fully disappears. And because this structure feels normal, few people question it. But now you have seen the pattern. You have seen the invisible architecture. Income alone does not create wealth. Assets do. Systems do. Compounding decisions do. And the moment someone begins designing their life around these principles, the trajectory changes. Not instantly, but permanently. Because every financial decision becomes a structural decision. Every dollar either strengthens the system or weakens it. Every year either increases optionality or deepens dependence. This is where the challenge begins. Not tomorrow, not next year. Now. Look at your current financial structure with brutal honesty. Ask one question. If your primary income disappeared today, how long would your system continue operating? Days? Months? Years? The answer reveals the current architecture of your life. And once the architecture is visible, the path forward becomes clear. Build capital. Acquire productive assets. Reinvest cash flow. Think in decades. Design systems that work even when you are not working. This is not a quick transformation. It is a strategic evolution. But those who commit to it experience a quiet but powerful shift. Money stops controlling their choices. Their choices begin controlling money. And when that happens, something extraordinary occurs. Freedom stops being a distant idea. It becomes a structural reality. So here is the final thought to carry forward. A single sentence that separates those who remain trapped from those who escape. The poor work for money. The wealthy design systems where money works without them. Once you understand that difference, you never look at money the same way again.